The context of where I'm starting from in this presentation is that we are perhaps in a world of chaos. Einstein has said that insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. Then if we have that case of wanting world peace, but we're always going through the cycle of control, stability, instability, revolutions, violence, control, etc., and that's like a pattern of human history, then maybe there's something really insane about our collective consciousness. Through my PhD research process, it really revealed to me that knowledge, or how we understand the world, starts and ends at creating frameworks for perception. And our social systems establish these perspective frameworks over many years of discourse and behavior. Although the premise of this presentation is that our systems of knowledge hierarchy have created faulty perceptions of the world, it's actually not exactly that. The real issue is that it's because we collectively don't recognize that we have such a hierarchy. So my answer to breaking out of the pattern of insanity is to see reality differently. A biased perception of truth or reality, I think, is human nature, but not recognizing that we have such a bias or a hierarchy to knowledge is what creates faulty perceptions of the world. According to Hans-Georg Gadamer, philosopher in Truth and Method, he says that within understanding is already the perpetual anticipation of meaning based on foreunderstanding. What that means is we can communicate with each other as a social species and make sense of the world because we already have preconceptions of the world within us. To create new knowledge, it means we need to disturb existing biases that we already have so that we can reestablish new agreements of understanding between people. This is a model of how I think we can understand the world, which are through different layers and depths. At the center, there's the material world, which is the tangible, physical stuff, what we can distinguish with our five senses, which would be considered empirical evidence. Then the next layer is the linguistic world, which includes everything that can be described with words. So non-empirical sides of history, culture, laws, regulations, literary art and literature, science and research findings, which are all like things that we can document, and also things that we not necessarily document, such as thoughts, beliefs, judgments, ideologies, identities, etc. The next layer is what I call the non-linguistic layer, which is everything else that is not material and not linguistic. I've included intuition, feelings, synchronicities, soul, fate, destiny, magic. So I'm getting kind of extreme there. It's just anything else. You may not even think that they exist. And then lastly, whatever is outside of that is the entire system, which I call the spiritual world, which is possibly unknown to us and its source. I'm comfortable with the word God, and I know that not everybody is. So this world takes on many terms: God, Tao, universe, great mystery, divine matrix, world, soul, the void, anything. Put anything in there as long as it means the whole system. If things were functioning well, then there's what I call a passage of understanding between all the different layers. They help inform us about the world in different ways. The common issues with our conventional way of knowing is that we doubt or even reject the existence of elements in the non-linguistic world, and also have some sort of obliviousness to the existence of a linguistic layer. Not everybody, just more like generally, collectively. And that creates a conflation between what we actually see as a filter through language and then believe that it's empirical evidence. My diagram shows that there's like this blockage created with a solid line. According to Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher, his famous quote, "Language is the house of being, and in its home human beings dwell," I think is really describes how we exist as existentially, because even though storytelling is really trendy these days, everywhere you go, there's like marketing and stuff is talking about storytelling. I think it's really relevant because the quality of our existence as a social species is determined by how well we tell our stories about ourselves. These stories or these narratives bridge the material realm with the non-linguistic realm. So for example, if we haven't witnessed something empirically or through our own inner knowing somehow, then we have to learn it from someone else through communication. And our identities are also tied to these narratives. Since much of history and culture is linguistic, and that also includes the interpretations we have of relics from the past, These stories create our collective identities. And on a personal level, beliefs and thoughts about ourselves are also linguistic, but of course, they also have a non-linguistic component, such as our emotions. We are inherently biased because we have different worldviews, but our stories are not the full truth because there's at least as many stories out there as the number of people who have lived on this planet. And even I'm saying, even in the past tense, in the future tense, our stories influence how we see the material world and the non-linguistic world. We can even have stories that say that elements in the world does not exist, such as there's no such thing as intuition. And if you keep saying that to yourself, you actually believe it. So when do our stories go wrong? It's when we create stories of not belonging and not enoughness, which are not supportive to views of humanity. And also when we identify with them instead of experiencing, telling, and listening to the stories. Note here, I adhere to the Buddhist idea of the not self and Eckhart Tolle's definition of the ego as identification to our minds, which is what I'm describing here as creating a personal and a collective ego through identification with the stories we tell about ourselves collectively and personally. The biggest story, or the one that we carry, I think, across humanity is probably about the one of original sin. And I don't think that this is just religious or Christian thing. It's really a part of popular culture. I think every adult, most adults at least, would be familiar with the story itself. So Adam and Eve live in the paradise of the Garden of Eden, and they are permitted to eat any fruit except the apples from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So Eve is tempted by a serpent and eats the apple. She gives some to Adam, and they become embarrassed by their nakedness. When God finds out, he exiles them from out of Eden for their sins, and they have become mortal. So in this story, there's themes of disobedience, patriarchy, shame, guilt, and not belonging. So what I want to do is actually flip the story and see it from another perspective. What I'm doing here will be Adam and Eve meets Taoism. To replace Adam and Eve, we'll have yin and yang. So yin is the feminine archetype that participates in the world by feeling, flowing, and intuiting. Yang is the masculine archetype that participates in the world of initiating, structuring, and acting. Yin and yang exist as complementary dualisms, just to make sure that yin and yang is not about gender or male and female. It's archetypal. So the Western equivalent could be anima and animus under Carl Jung's psychology or philosophy, whatever you want to call it. So what really happened from this perspective? Yin and yang coexist in the Tao, understanding the nature of complementary dualisms. When Yin is tempted to eat the apple from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, she exchanges her power of intuition and receptivity for the fruit of knowledge that creates binary judgments. After offering the fruit to Yang, Yin and Yang both learn to feel shame and consequently are self-exiled from a place of belonging and sinlessness to a placeless mortality on earth. The theme of this story is the tragedy of not valuing one's own inner knowing and worth. And through these two different perspectives of the same parts of the story are still there. To me, it warns us to not take stories literally. There's metaphors, archetypes, parables, and things that are part of it. And also that there's a power in inner knowing that has been lost to the temptation of knowing in a binary judgmental manner. So just like the wounded feminine or Eve or Yin archetype, in the wounding of other archetypes, we can find the essence of most of our human insecurities. I found this on a blog. I don't take credit for any of this, called The Mysterial Woman. She does a really good overview of these wounded archetypes. That's Susan Anderson. I'll just do a brief review of that. The mother archetype, the wounded version, is I am not enough. Healed, I am enough just as I am. The hero, I have to do to be of value. That's the wounded version. The healed version, I am empowered to do what is mine to do. The father, wounded archetype, I do not belong. The healed version, at home in myself, I naturally belong. The wounded maiden, I'm not free to express myself fully. And the healed version, I am free to express my true nature. The wounded crone, I don't have enough knowledge, connections, or influence. And the healed crone, I am an evolving source of wisdom, love, and power. I think our social systems or our world in general really operates from the wounded aspect of all of these archetypes, just not being able to be who one needs to be. So what does that have to do to our collective societies? What are the implications of our collective wounding? The first thing I want to bring up is that it affects our relationship with nature. If we start with original sin, humans are bad, and we have binary judgments because the tree of knowledge, then when humans are bad, then therefore nature is good. We have two options out of that. Either humans are part of nature or humans are not part of nature. If humans are not part of nature, then obviously we don't belong, we aren't enough, we don't have enough, and we have to do something to compensate for that. Our economic system illustrates that. If we decide that we are part of nature, then our proof that we see outside, such as here, I just showing pollution and climate change, global warming, not to say we have, I didn't even or show the picture of war and harming other human beings, but from our proof of how we behave in the world, then you must be natural pests to destroy the planet and each other. And through these actions, we go through a cycle of commodification, pollution, war, whatever, all that, to really emphasize that we're bad. And obviously, the more you do it, the more you emphasize this original humans are bad, we have original sin, etc. When we have this, we also have a sort of cognitive dissonance because I believe that there is a natural longing to connect back to nature, we would say, or just connect back to our habitat, our home. But in academic terms, it becomes romanticizing nature, right? The symptoms that come out of that. And on the other hand, human vices, the things that we don't like about ourselves, would sometimes be called human nature. And it reverses when we start to blame nature, such as it's human nature to be greedy kind of thing. So how do we usually solve the not enoughness or things that inadequacy? Conventionally, we do this through filling it up. Not good enough, we fill it up with accomplishments. Not knowing enough, we create some sort of certainty. Not having enough, we create things to accumulate. And on top of that, we can have comparisons so that the conclusion is at least I'm more than someone else. That is really the process of commodification. And the normal way we think of commodities is through the use value and exchange value. According to Karl Marx, the use value is material, the exchange value is purely social. I consider this like an add value definition of commodity, which means that we start at zero worth for whatever item we're commodifying. So what can be commodified through this perspective is anything we want or need can be commodified. So natural resources, housing, labor, etc., knowledge, ourselves. We can also see this from a different perspective. If we start at intrinsic worth for whatever item we want to talk about, then the act of commodification is actually going through a deadening process to reduce an item's worth to usability and exchangeability. So I would also think that commodification in this sense is a reduced value process. In this case, what can be commodified? It's only the things that we don't value as part of life's experience. And language can be the process of commodification. According to David Abram, in indigenous oral cultures, language seems to encourage and augment the participatory life of the senses, while in Western civilization, language seems to deny or deaden that life, promoting a massive distrust of sensorial experience while valorizing an abstract realm of ideas hidden behind or beyond sensory appearances. The second way that our perspectives, our stories affect our collective wounding is the establishment of social systems to keep these compensation patterns and beliefs in place. Anything can be institutionalized, such as religion, government systems, professional bodies, family units, etc. And creating structure through institutions is healthy, which is the healthy father archetype, but using authority to reinforce an illusion of certainty or correctness as a means of power is not, which is essentially the wounded father archetype. And we've had lots of examples of rejecting beliefs and forms of knowledge in our history. Many have been violent, such as the historical witch hunts, colonialism, and the missionary work that came with it. Lots of examples in the pre-Enlightenment period with the Catholic Church versus heretics, the most famous one being Galileo. There's cultural revolutions, communist and fascist movements. Then there's also really small scale ones, like on a day-to-day basis, such as just funding particular research topics over others and peer pressure in an environment to see things in a particular way or practice things in a different way. This leads to the third implication that I have here, overcompensating for old stories. This is the process of trying to correct what is perceived as a past wrong by rejecting old stories, systems, beliefs, and behaviors, but using the same rooted paradigms, such as insecurity and binary judgments. And we have like polarized politics, tokenism, cancel culture, and political correctness. If people remember the Newton's cradle and physics, if you know that even a swing, if you're going to pull someone off to one side from their center, you know where the other side is going to go. And that creates overcompensation. But on top of that, if it becomes institutionalized, then there's a form of indirect control that comes out of this. So the silences or reduces dissent because of unconscious shame, guilt, and fear created from humanity's history of often very violent traumas related to authorities. So I was adding the little star here to just suggest maybe that the things we see in cancel culture and political correctness may perhaps be symptoms of larger collective unconscious patterns of institutionalized violence, such as cultural revolutions and communist fascist movements. There's a cycle being produced there, which sometimes that's why I feel even these little things can be quite scary subconsciously. And also, institutionalized correctness is repressive because it doesn't leave room for personal reflection and a process of healing. So how can we heal collective traumas by rewriting narratives with compassion? What can we do as an individual or collectively? If we zoom out into that circle diagram that I had before, all the way to the universe level, then I think of the holographic principle. In quantum physics theory, there's the principle that the universe is holographic, which means that what we see three-dimensionally is potentially something projected from encoded data that can fit on a 2D surface level. Every part of a hologram contains information about the whole scene, like a smaller window. Each piece of the hologram captures a unique perspective of the whole scene. So I saw descriptions online and on YouTube videos. Well, basically, it talks about how those holographic prints or cards that they used to have maybe in the 90s, or I don't know, it was maybe later, that if you cut them up, they're supposed to be able to still hold the image, but at a different perspective. So if you cut them in lots of fragments, they'll still have the image. So if that was the case for us, then we actually all hold encoding of the world within us. Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh describes that the body has wisdom. He says the body is a wonder. The body is the seat of consciousness, the consciousness of the cosmos. Your body contains all information of the history of the cosmos. In every cell of your body, you recognize the presence of your ancestors, not only human ancestors, but animal, vegetal, and mineral ancestors. All of your ancestors are still alive in your body with their weakness and with their strength. I want to emphasize on the weakness part, because part of our collective wounding comes from the pain that still lives in the body. I like the way that Eckhart Tolle has described that as the pain body. And it's not really about the physical pain you feel, it's more the emotional pain, which comes out as very psychological patterns. He says, once the pain body has taken over you, you want more pain. You become a victim or a perpetrator. You want to inflict pain or want to suffer pain or both. There isn't really much difference between the two. You're not conscious of this, of course, and will vehemently claim that you do not want pain. But look closely and you'll find that your thinking and behavior are designed to keep pain going for yourself and others. And that's really in the pattern of our language and the patterns of the behavior that comes out of our language that keeps this pain body going. And I like how he discusses like the collective ego, collective pain bodies. What we need to do is hold space to heal this pain through a paradoxical process, which is, could say, the pain and beauty, yin and yang, etc. I'm going to quote myself here. Although the combination of beauty and pain is somewhat of an oxymoron, if we consider pain as the suffering that life offers for growth, beauty can find its way as a type of healing process. But a beauty that can heal a society's greatest wounds needs to come from something greater than the society itself. And when I say something greater, then I'm bringing up the topic of the soul of the world, which is in my title. anima mundi, an idea of a vital force that permeates the world and has been found in ancient writings such as those of Plato, Stoicism, and Eastern philosophy. And you can even find allusions to this in writings of modern philosophers such as Spinoza, Schelling, Hegel, Merleau-Ponty, Heidegger, etc. James Hillman notes that if whatever we consider as soul does not include the world in which we live, then the world also does not have soul, because making soul is a choice to see the world in a particular way. I know that we have quite a debate over the existence of souls in the modern era, and that's the way how language changes our perspectives. He says, as the soul is without world, so the world is without soul. Let us imagine the anima mundi as that particular soul spark, that seminal image which offers itself through each thing in its visible form. As I said, making soul is a choice to see the world differently. A world without soul is essentially dead. And maybe we are collectively just trying to prove this case, that a world soul that's dead, through our social, political, and ecological engagements with the world. When we ensoul our perspective, we give life into the world, and we need wisdom to ensoul the world. How do we tell the difference between knowledge and wisdom? I refer to politics to show that. When I think of politics, or even internal politics, trying to force something, I think of the serenity prayer. The famous first part is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that human civilization is okay knowing how to accept or when to accept some things. And we're really good at wanting to change the things we don't like, but not necessarily having the courage to. But I think the big thing is not knowing the wisdom, what things should be accepted and what things to be changed. And I think that is the essence of politics. Well, generally, if you think of politics as the art and science of government from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, but we also, on a broader sense, think of the political as relating to civil affairs, states, citizens, and people, or even on a smaller scale or more abstract, the management of units, such as like having office politics or identity politics. If we look at the Greek etymology, then polis is like the city. But according to Heidegger, the ancient meaning goes back to the pole, which is something that pivots, and it pivots this way or that way. And it shows you where things are pivoting, and it's manifested as the place itself where human beings dwell, such as the city. This idea of polis then is really a mirroring of humanity's state of being. If our political systems look like disasters, and they're not aligned with our social and ecological well-being, then they're telling us that something is off with the way we humans are relating to the world. What I see as the tragedy of the commons, and that's not just the commons physically, but our social commons as well. It's really a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is a story that is found in our collective unconscious. Maybe some of us have this in our consciousness. The way to break out of these patterns means to break out of the collective winning. Carl Jung calls this the process of individuation. It's not easy because you need to confront the guilt of leaving the group. He says, individuation cuts one off from personal conformity and hence collectivity. That is the guilt which the individuant leaves behind him for the world. That is the guilt he must endeavor to redeem. He must offer ransom in place of himself, that he must bring forth values, which are an equivalent substitute for his absence in the collective personal sphere. I think that it's not just guilt. There's fears and shames that need to be confronted when we look at the collective wounding. Maybe it's because in the decades or nearly a century since Carl Jung first thought about these things, it's that we've had a lot more solidification of these wounds. And I think we need to go back to the beginning of Adam and Eve, or the yin and yang story, to reestablish our priorities. So rethinking the relevance of the tree of knowledge, and ask ourselves, how do we really know the world? So I'm being intentionally ironic here with the questions. Do you need a psychologist to tell you how your mind works? Do you need a psychic to tell you how to use your intuition? And do you need a philosopher to tell you what is life all about? And I know that, yes, we get influenced and we get support from the external sources, but really, how do we really know our world? There is always this internal processing within us. But how supportive is our educational systems towards this internal processing of trusting ourselves with our knowing of the world? Is our basis of our educational system around the natural curiosity of beginner minds? Is it about nurturing self-sufficient and healthy individuals, or is it an institutionalized commodity for a greater wounding of not knowing enough? Like a knowledge production system of production line players, such as students, educators, researchers, administrators, publishers, language citation associations, conference organizers, and so on. And within higher education, I think that there are quite a few paradoxes that show that we're actually maintaining a source of insecurity, such as knowing what you know and fearing that you don't know enough, knowing that you know and fearing not being accepted for what you know, and also the opposite, not knowing what you don't know, which is okay, but needing to prove that you do. Although imposter syndrome is quite common, I think, in every profession and everywhere, I think it's quite a thing for graduate students because in the process of being one, you pretty much are learning to validate what you know through the rationale of other people's validated knowledge. These are symptoms if you're a grad student, but they not necessarily apply, but I definitely have found them in myself as I going through my PhD. So reading authors just in case to cover your back if someone asks. Worry about citations over worrying about them. But I've also stopped to wonder why new standards come out so often. Dismissing what you know from your own experience or intuition, and then search for scholarly text to back you up, because what we know is intrinsically just not enough for the system. And then question if a source of insight, wisdom, opinion is valid enough to cite, because often being told that peer-reviewed text is more valid than popular authors or other general people on the internet, even though we may actually resonate with these sources. We've also seen symptoms of how knowledge is treated as a commodity. So the competition for opportunities, funding, and being validated. The publisher perish culture, which is ingrained already, especially in the PhD level, maintaining some sort of ladder you need to get on. And then generally, undergraduates or even in high school, using the grading scheme as a measure of intelligence, achievement, and worthiness. And in order to keep the hierarchy going, that needs to be defended and controlled. And I personally would see that the system of validating knowledge is social political. So we see that there are cases of the decline of humanities, or at least less funding and less value, increased value of STEM disciplines, and using the idea of evidence-based research as proof of validity. So I don't know, philosophy isn't really because it wouldn't be an evidence-based research. So there's not much validity in a lot of what I'm saying in that case. I've been thinking of a rhetorical question in recent years, such as, is indigenous knowledge in East Asian philosophy more respected these days because of social political pressures to be more inclusive, creating some sort of fetishism, or is there an intrinsic acceptance to see things differently? And I personally would think that there is a bit of all of it, but maybe in a personal level, there's more intrinsic acceptance to see things differently, but maybe at an institution perspective, there is definitely a social political pressure towards that. And then there's gatekeeping to define what's a discipline, what is valid research process, how to disseminate research and who to cite, and also the pressure to deny the archetypal feminine ways of knowing and being. So I've been seen in blogs and articles suggesting to grad students to refrain from emotions, especially when you're interviewing for a job or something like that. And I've seen in undergraduate students the fear of using the first person. I didn't think it was still a thing, but yes, they still have that. And knowing because you just know is not a valid reason to just know. So breaking knowledge hierarchy means self-validating what we already know and using knowledge processes such as research teaching to rebuild trust in our self-worth. So I've been seeing research as the seeking of something we already know, because if I break that down, researching at its core, it's a rediscovering of what we already know but have forgotten as human beings. I do see that there are signs of change because I've heard of a lot more cases of people doing reflexive research and interest in experiential education. And there's been greater intersectionality with archetypal feminine ways of knowing and being, such as, these are the ones that top of mind for me, is Robin Wall Kimmerer balancing science, ancestral knowledge, personal experience in a very heart-based writing approach. And then maybe earlier would be Brené Brown, who's become part of popular self-help culture through her research on vulnerability and shame as something that create resilience. And also she has used her personal experience to describe this. Breaking knowledge hierarchy, as I mentioned before, is about acknowledging the validity of knowledge we already come with. So intuitive, ancestral, experiential knowledge, for example, and also respecting the synchronistic process of the knowledges we encounter. So there is a process, a life process that we encounter, the different types of knowledge that comes to us. There's something beyond forcing ourselves to know something. Just want to go back to imposter syndrome then. If having imposter syndrome is feeling that we are pretending to be someone we are not, then it's really a case of self-denial. So in denying our own knowingness for someone else's, we are not realizing that we are always the expert of ourselves. And this isn't something we are taught in school. Can we be worthy without use value or exchange value? And can we be worthy despite both good and bad qualities as human beings? I say yes, if we make use of the idea of the gift economy, which Robin Wall Kimmerer brings up, but I'm sure other people have talked about this. If you're thinking that we are gifts to the world, then life is also a gift back to us. And in gifts, there's the idea of receiving. So giving and taking is not the same as giving and receiving. First, receiving is like a feminine archetypal quality. And second, you need to feel worthy in order to receive. Out of that, we have gratitude, because gratitude replaces fear, shame, worthiness, and the need to compensate. Taking then becomes receiving, and the inner knowing that we have can be shared, and knowledge becomes wisdom.